So when I became a chief executive, my first experience of that, I had a board that was quite, I'd say, disproportionately weighed towards people from the private sector. And I went into the organization at a time where the previous chief exec had been fired. There was a big deficit. I mean, it was a very, very difficult time for the organization. And there was a real focus on getting money, plugging the deficit, basically cutting costs, bringing money in. And there was this kind of drive to sort of chase funding. And my concern of that, which is a really common concern in the sector, is mission drift. We had a mission as an organization, and I worried in the kind of the drive to deal with the difficult situation around finances, that we were going into areas where we didn't have the expertise, we didn't have the reputation, and that was dangerous to us as an organization. So those were difficult issues. I remember we had this guy on our board from IBM who was like very, very focused on cutting costs. And so one of his suggestions to me was that we get rid of our the person who was the cleaner, and it was a large building that we were in. Well, she basically had been working in the organization for 25 years. She was like, if there could have been a mascot of the organization, that it would have been her. She was an immigrant. This was an organization that worked with immigrants and refugees. Many of the staff were immigrants or refugees. And the idea that we would fire basically the least well-paid member of staff and get in some company, where we'd have like a different person on every shift as a way of maybe saving a few $1,000s. I mean, I was just horrified by that kind of instrumental thinking. I mean, I would have quit. There's no way I was going to do that. So I felt as a chief exec that a lot of what I did was trying to demonstrate and live the values of the organization in spite of the board, kind of in battle with the board, rather than feeling like I was really helped by the board. So those were difficult times. I guess another real conflict is where you have a lot of dependence on government funding. And so we were an organization that did a lot of contracts on behalf of the government. And, our mission was to work with immigrants and refugees. And there was this funding that we received from them and it was specific to working with this particular group of people. And they changed the conditions of the contract. And so we were no longer allowed to, quote, discriminate. We had to basically provide services to everybody. And those kinds of decisions, like what do we do as an organization? Do we say, no, we're not going to accept the funding? I mean, that would have been one way that we would have lived our values. We would have said, no, we're not going to do this because it is our mission to work with this specific group of people. And we have these specific skills and expertise. This is what we're known for. Where do we start? One contract where we just, we basically provide employment services to everybody. Had we taken that line, which would have been a very principled line, we would have lost 20% of our staff, would have been like 20 people, just like that, would have basically been made redundant. And it would have had massive, massive impact on right throughout the organization in terms of, just pure impact financially, let alone reputationally. And so we went with the contract. And so, those kinds of decisions where your mission and your principles are fundamentally shaped by funding. I mean, it's a really difficult situation. And now I look back on it and I think, oh, maybe we should have said, no, we're not going to do it. But they would have just gone to somebody else. They would have lost the contract, so all those people who'd worked in the organization for all those years. And we mainly did work with immigrants, continued to mainly work with immigrants and refugees because that was the community that we were in. But that was the beginning of a shift. So those are hard issues. There were times that I felt that we needed to take a much more sort of political position as a sector. So this issue I told you about with the funding changing, I really felt as a community, we needed to take a hard line with the government and sort of make an argument about why this funding decision really would have consequences for our organizations. So there was quite a big battleground really in some of those negotiations that took place between, you know, organizations like ours that did a lot of work on behalf of the government. You know, probably an answer that people expect to hear is around kind of business acumen. And I think that there has been, over the last couple of decades, there's been a real focus on and sort of professionalization of the sector. And some of that's important and necessary. And I do think it's important for the sector to be, you know, professional and accountable. But to me, leadership and sort of business savvy, it's much more about ensuring that you have enough money coming in, that the organization is stable, but that you never, ever, ever lose sight of your mission, like your purpose for being there. You know, and if you do have a healthy reserve, that's great. And you should be using that to invest it back in your community in some way. So again, that, you know, when I had a sort of more business oriented board, you know, it was always about driving a higher turnover. You know, why was that such a measure of, like, why wouldn't it have been okay for us to just stay with the same kind of turnover over a period of time, as long as we were solid? You know, like I think some of the business principles that we've adopted have sort of taken us away from our mission a little bit, so that we're kind of measured by the same kind of targets that happen in the private sector, where it's all about growth. I think, you know, your turnover could stay the same as long as where you're growing is that you're continually ensuring that you're supporting and serving your community. You know, have you really reflected the sort of changing needs of your community? That's much more important than increasing your turnover by 20%. I've got quite strong feelings about those things, because I feel like, in a way, the sector's been a little bit corrupted in a way by some of those sort of kind of priorities, and it's reshaped some of the values, I think, for some organizations.